Now, brassica planting is something that can really boost your hunting this fall. And it's unfortunate because not everywhere do deer really like brassica, but thankfully, in my experience around the country, say the north half, the north 25 whitetail states, it's only about 5% of locations where deer don't like brassica, and even then there's remedies. Brassica is a great fall crop because it's full of moisture. It's almost like putting a water hole out for deer. Deer eat dry vegetation all day, whether it be acorns, woody shrub tips, briars, hardwood regeneration, and then they can't wait to go hit that green food plot. Brassicas are great, about 80% moisture, and the brassica family would include rape, turnip, radish, and there's others like canola, kale, even beets. But with that, these are the three common, the radish, rape, and turnip. So that's what's in most mixes. You want to mix because you want different varieties maturing at different dates. And just because the maturity date is 10 weeks on a brassica doesn't mean it doesn't continue to grow or that it's not viable after that. And that's why it makes it for a great fall planting. But bottom line, it produces a lot of tonnage, several tons. It's interesting because clover will produce about the same amount of tonnage, but it's over a 5 to 6 month period of growth, where a brassica planting can hit that tonnage in about 10 weeks. So it's a very high quality forage that produces a lot of volume going into the fall. And when you're trying to manage small food plots and small food plot acreage and be efficient with your plantings, then a brassica crop can be a great fit. I first planted brassicas back in '99. I planted them in May because I wanted them as a cover crop for clover, and I heard they won't eat until the frost hits, and they were all gone by July. This was an area in the northern Michigan, in the UP of Michigan, out in the middle of nowhere. And in that location, the deer had never seen that green forage, never been close to it. They don't have ag fields, apple trees, mass crops of any kind, any other food plots for many, many miles. But that green was such high value to them in June and July, they ate it down to the dirt, and that was the first year. And so I'm thinking this crop is gonna last. And for one, that was a long time ago. I didn't realize that you shouldn't be planting them in the spring anyways. It's not a good idea. They can rot and go way past maturity. And we're talking months past maturity, not just a few weeks. But it was interesting, that blew the first frost date. That's when they like to eat them. The starches turn to sugar and sweeten up and all this. And I found that meant that was a broad range of about 9 months of feeding, where I've seen them rot in the spring after a cold winter, lots of frost, lots of snow, frozen ground, frozen temps, and they still rotted. And then I've seen them in that case, they ate them by July. So there's a large window. You can throw the frost date out of the plantings of brassica. So kind of ignore the frost seed. We're gonna go through some strategies of this and planting. And again, if you can get this on your plot and get this on your soil and growing for the deer in the fall, it's great, because again, it is great volume. It's probably the #1 volume plant that you can plant in that short a time when you get in that early August window. So you can throw the frost date right out the window. One thing to be very concerned with when you're planting brassica is overdoing it. Kind of like stunted bluegill in a pond, or stunted bass, where there's so many in one small area. They're all fighting for nutrition and the nutrients in the soil, and they just aren't viable. They're not going to make it. And so we're really taking a good hard look at that even today. This is a brand new food plot. We sprayed this food plot 3 times. At the time of the last spraying, I applied 2 quarts per acre of glyphosate to any weeds that were in here to get rid of them. I don't want any competition for the brassica, because if there's competition here, it's not going to be any kind of food in the fall, and it's diminishing the value of this food plot. But this food plot's 2 acres. You can see how long it is right here. It's a big long strip. And so I'm planting a heavy amount of tillage radish on the whole thing, light amount of brassica on the other. The radish is a portion of the brassica family. That's why I'm going light brassica combination on one half, and then the other half that was just tillage radish down here, then I'll add 200 pounds of winter rye on it going into the September. We sprayed this area, seeded it the same day. The glyphosate will not kill the seed. There's no residual left in the soil. It's not going to kill it or harm your brassica seed. And then we followed up with the plot start, because this pH is low out here, and we need to give it that initial boost. And we actually left a strip down the middle where we didn't spray the plot start, so that we can test the sides that have been applied. And I was going to do half, and I believe it'll work. It's an alternative to using lime. We can't get a lime truck back into some of these skinny plots and some of our wooded plots. It wouldn't even make sense to. We couldn't get them back here anyway. So using that plot start, if I have to use that every year and it works, that's great. And we're going to test it out down the middle. But it's easy to apply too many seeds to this area. I encourage you to go light. Most mixes are 6 pounds. I use a mix because I want 5 or 6 different seeds in there, a quality mix. I don't want a high percentage of dwarf Essex rate because they don't call it dwarf for nothing. There's not much there. And so I want there to be a light amount here. And that's what we're doing today. Kind of looking out here and assessing what our germination rates are. We've had 2 thunderstorms, which is not good. We want more lengthy rain to get more appreciable germination. I'm hoping that after a week, there's a couple rains in the forecast. I'm hoping that that'll show that there's a little bit more here. But right now, I would actually add a little bit in some areas and kind of micromanage this plot because again, I want that volume going into the fall. So it's very important. Ignore the frost date. We'll talk about that in a little bit of when the deer are going to hit it. Make sure you're not applying too much. Number 3, if the deer are finicky in your area with Brassica, it's very easy to add 50 pounds of peas to this mix. In the beginning, especially if we were using next year we'll use the buckwheat ultimate no-till in this location where we're seeding into the buckwheat and then crushing it down, spraying, following with the plot start. Very easy to get those peas into this planting using something like that without even working up the earth. Now, if we're working up the earth, we're just bringing more weed seeds in, but those peas can sweeten the plot. Now you could add 25 pounds of soybeans per acre, those late planted beans, so you have that green tonnage going into November. And that'll make the deer hit the Brassica earlier too because they're already in here. And you ask, why would you train the deer to eat the Brassica? Well, again, it goes back to it's going to be the most volume that you can take into October, November. It's highly nutritious for the deer. It's full of moisture, so it's very attractive and it's very good for them. So if the deer don't eat the Brassica in your area, that's not a good thing. Typically, that means you don't have enough deer, and you're maybe planting Brassica off to the side. So we're often, we have a strip of rye over here with the tillage radish. We have more full Brassica blend on this half. On all my plots, I'm doing that. Whether we have the WHS mix from Northwoods Whitetails, where we have the beans, peas, and oats. On one side, we're top dressing with that with rye and Labor Day, about 200 pounds per acre. And then on the other side, we have the Brassica. We don't want to sweeten it around here. In most ag areas, if you're sweetening the Brassica, they hit it too early. I'd really like the timing to be late October. If these deer aren't hitting the Brassica till December, that's too late for me. I want it to be a part of that November draw. That's the most critical time of the year where you actually build a herd, hunt a herd, create a quality deer herd, and really help the deer before they get into the wintertime. So I really want that to peak in November. If I'm seeing that they're eating the Brassica in September, real early, and I've been adding peas and beans, you get rid of the peas and beans. If you're not seeing that the deer, they don't eat the Brassica until January, February, then you definitely want to add beans and peas to try to move that window up. Sure, you're helping the deer then, but you can help them just the same before they go into the winter too. They'll build those fat reserves. I think you can make a case that even before winter, before they're shutting down their metabolism as much and they're trying to just lay around lazy all day and not burn a lot of energy, it's really good for them to have that high quality forage going into November. So think about those 3 things. Forget about the frost date. Think about your timing of when the deer are actually hitting the Brassica. If they're hitting it late, try to sweeten the pot. If they're hitting it too early, make sure to get rid of those beans and peas and really look at your overall coverage and rate. I'm looking at, and if you look around here, I'm looking at I want to see a plant every 5, 6 inches, 7 inches. If they're a foot apart, 2 feet apart, then you have some holes to fill. And in that case, I'd probably only go over it with 1 to 2 pounds per acre. A lot of times people say, well, it's impossible to spread it that light. It's possible, but you just have to be very patient and know that you're barely going to see that seed coming out. And even in your initial planting, if it was 6 pounds per acre in the mix that like our Northwoods Whitetails mix that we plant, the Sweet Feast Brassica blend, that's 6 pounds per acre, and that's pretty light. I believe that's on about a 1.5 setting on the Earthway spreader. But you're better off going at 1 1/4 and going light and going over it again than you are wasting all that seed in the beginning. And again, Brassicas especially, it's not so much when you're planting peas, beans, late planted beans, rye, where you can overseed. But when you have Brassica and you have those small seeds and they're very competitive, you can see we're on a slight angle here. And so we need to tilt that bag at that angle and spread so that it matches and parallel to the top of the soil here so that we get an even spread. If we tilt that, so where we're slamming that seed into the side right here, we're gonna have strips of low volume seed because that Brassica will crowd together in that strip and it'll be small, just like it's stunted, and in between you'll have a larger, higher amount. I've done that myself. I think I did that 3 or 4 years ago. So it's been recently that I did that. I just sometimes get into a fog and I don't do what I'm supposed to, and that happens to everybody, even if you do it for a living. But make sure it's parallel to that seed. So again, going back to Brassica is a great high volume crop. There's ways that you can slant it towards that October, November, early December time frame for forage. Soybeans can get overly aggressively. I have a lot of clients right now that planted soybeans, even if I urge them not to, or people around the country, that soybeans are getting into this time of the year and it's a major failure because they've been eaten down to the dirt. You can easily spread Brassica in those locations, especially if you've been taking care of the weeds. But like soybeans, I found in the UP of Michigan, I had 8 acres of plots. I'd have 6 acres of Brassica going into the fall at times, sometimes with a clover base. This is back in the 2000s. And I found that I couldn't take a lot of Brassica in November because the deer would eat it down. So in some areas it's rotting in the spring, in other areas you can't get it into November because the deer eat it, even with low deer numbers, because it might be the only thing that's available. We're fortunate around here, we have a lot of ag, complementary ag. I have a big cornfield right here, there's alfalfa on the other side, all in the neighbors. But they're gonna eat this Brassica right here at a lot lower pace than they would in a big wooded setting where they don't have a lot of food. So there's a lot of ways to slant the timing. If you're in a big northern setting, you're gonna need more acres on your land of Brassica or it's not gonna make it. And bottom line, and I'll finish with this, is that if you have a Brassica crop failure, if it's eaten down to the dirt like soybeans, I find that's not as bad as soybeans, but it still can be, it's pretty non-browse resistant. So you can easily add 200 pounds of winter rye, fall rye, annual rye grain around Labor Day in most states. You could slant that all the way back to, let's say you're in West Virginia or Kentucky, some of the more southern areas of whitetail, even down into Georgia, Oklahoma. You could add 200 pounds of winter rye all the way up until October. And if you still have some bare soil showing in mid-October, not a bad idea to add it in those southern states, and that would apply to mid to late September in more Michigan, New York, Pennsylvania, where you could even add another 200 pounds of winter rye per acre over the top of it and salvage the plot. This was an easy, I've done this dozens of times, where you take an area that's full of goldenrod, ragweed, briars, small trees, bushes. We spray it down 3 times. Your first spraying is the most important, and that would be glyphosate 2,4-D is what we hit this with. That was in April. Then May, June, late April, late May, June, and then finally when we're getting into the end of July, if there's still weeds, we're spraying just 2 quarts per acre of glyphosate, and we're throwing the Brassica on the ground. And as of right now, we have a good catch, and I'm really happy with this food plot. It relates to stand location over here, one down the middle that will blow our scent into this field during the middle of the day for cruising rut hunts, and then another stand all the way on the end. So this sets up a whole stand system in this area that relates to for hunting. And Brassica crop, if you haven't tried it before, then I hope you do. An incredible high volume plot for going into your hunting season, helping your herd and your hunt, helping you build a herd, helping you add a lot of nutrition to the herd before wintertime, and then certainly helping your hunt. At the same time, if it's running out, you might need to have bigger fields, get rid of beans and peas or other additives that might be in there. Sugar beets is a bad additive because it needs a longer period of nutrition. So a lot of times when you see sugar beets in a Brassica blend, they're just trying to sweeten the pot for you to actually buy it and attract your dollars. You can always shape the timing. If they're not eating it till, or if it's dying, if they're not eating it till February, March, or it's dying in the spring, it's rotting in the spring, you can always add those plot sweeteners to move up the timing for when the deer actually feed on it. Make sure it's next to complementary food sources where they're already eating on. Like in this case, they're gonna hit the young rye, the tillage radish early, and the full Brassica blend hopefully a little bit later. We often add oats with that mix too. So there's a lot of ways you can get the deer to eat it earlier. You might need more food or take out of those sweeteners so they'll hit it later. The bottom line, there's a lot of strategy that you incorporate with Brassica. Always make sure that you're not putting too much seed out, and it can create a high volume, super attractive hunting plot going into this fall and beyond, and you can learn to manage it each year like we do. You never plant Brassica in the same spot twice in a row, so we're always rotating from one half to the other. And we look forward to this plot, and we're gonna baby it and make sure we have enough seed in here over the next couple weeks. But this can be a great addition to our fall hunt on our new Minnesota property this year. Well, if you made it to the end of this video, you're obviously interested in Whitetail Habitat Solutions, what I have to teach, and you will love my new web class series. The first one is how to design your whitetail property. It's out now. The link is in the description. I invite you to check it out. It's on my website. Can't wait to hear about it.